Today's lecture is on the 2013 Data Breach Investigations Report. It's a report that Verizon produces every year for the last 9 years. This report is also known as the DBIR. So this year's report includes 621 confirmed data disclosures, also known as data breaches or security breaches, in which data was compromised. The amount of data compromised for this that's included in this report includes 44 million records of data. So this report, again, 621 confirmed data disclosures, which entails 44 million compromised records. The data for this report comes from many different sources, and the sources are listed here. It includes different governments: Australia, the Danish, Dutch, Irish, and U.S. Secret Service, plus some universities such as Carnegie Mellon, companies such as Deloitte, and also Verizon. So Verizon does publish this report every year. The reason why Verizon's involved in this is because they do have a team that does in security breach investigations. So some of the data in this report comes from their very own investigations, but I'd say a majority of the data comes from all of these different partners that give data to Verizon. That data is cleaned of any identifiable information, so we're not actually reporting the actual breaches themselves, meaning this report doesn't include who was breached, the company name, and it does not include the actual actor or the people that are doing the breaches. It's just data related to the breaches themselves. So that's the list of the people that report each year to create this report. So the overview of why I want to show you the data in this report is because it gives you a good sense of who is committing these breaches, what they are breaching, and kind of like an idea of why they're doing these breaches, and finally how they are accomplishing these breaches. So these are all really good pieces of data to kind of give you an insight into the information security world. All right, so a little disclaimer first here. Just so you know, when you're looking at the figures, and there's many different tables and figures that we'll be looking at in this lecture, some of the figures and tables do not add up to 100%, and some of them add up to more than 100%. And what they're saying is this is not an error. It just simply stems from the fact that the items presented in a list are not always mutually exclusive, and thus several can apply to any given incident. So, for example, we might have a data breach that was accomplished because of malware and also because of social engineering. So that breach would actually be counted twice in 2 lines, one for malware, one for social engineering. And so when you add it up, you'd see more than 100%. And I'll give you some examples of that in a minute, but when we're going through this, just know that some rows will add up to more than 100%. All right, so some of the data that we're going to be looking at, and this is an overview of some of the data that we're going to be looking at in more detail. Here's the summary. So, what did they find when they did this study? Well, they found that 75% of breaches were driven by financial motives. And whenever you see this little minus, that means that's actually down from last year. So 75% this year. It was higher last year, meaning a larger percentage of data breaches were driven by financial motives last year than this year. Another interesting fact that they found was 71% of the targets in terms of how the breach was accomplished. Well, they targeted user devices, and that's actually up this year. 54% included compromised servers. So again, here's where you'll see, oh wait, 71% was targeted devices and 54% was compromised servers. That adds up to more than 100%. What's going on here? Well, what's going on here is that probably what happened first was a user device was compromised, and then from there a server was compromised. So one particular breach included two different categories. Really interesting fact here, 75% of the breaches are considered opportunistic attacks, meaning that they were not targeted attacks. So in other words, someone was just kind of out there looking, surfing through the internet, looking for different vulnerabilities, and once they found a vulnerability, then they'd perform their attack. So they weren't looking at specific companies. Maybe they were looking at specific vulnerabilities. But the point is, what I take away from this at least, is that you want to be the more secure than anyone else in your industry, and hopefully more secure than the majority of the people or majority of the companies that are on the internet, because what hackers are doing is that they're going after kind of the easy compromises, and that tells me this right here: 75% are opportunistic attacks, simply because there's a lot of sites out there that are just not properly secured, and therefore those are being taken advantage of, and not really for any particular reason. They're just saying, hey, that one's vulnerable, let's go ahead and attack that. All right, 78% of initial intrusions rated as low difficulty. Probably not very surprising, but most intrusions happen with very low-tech ways of accomplishing those intrusions, either through script kiddie stuff or easily guessed passwords or default passwords or social engineering. Most of those compromises are low difficulty, and that encompasses 78% of all of the reported compromises in this particular report. So that's pretty interesting. 69% of breaches reported in this report were discovered by an external party. This is really, really scary, and we're going to look at this in more detail later on. That means that the company that got breached was not the one that discovered the breach. More than, well, what is it, 69%. So 69% of all discoveries of breaches were not discovered by the company that got breached. They were discovered by internal or external parties. So that's pretty scary. And on top of that, it took months or more to discover that breach. So 66% of all the breaches reported in this study took months or more to discover. So these are pretty basic failures, I would say, in terms of the company's preparedness and their sophistication and everything that they're doing for information security. Well, they should know that they got breached, at least as much as the external parties, and they should discover it sooner. So these are two things that corporations, industry could work on a little bit better in order to prevent some of these breaches from occurring, or from preventing them from becoming ongoing attacks. All right, so next interesting tidbit, and again, all of these are kind of overviews. We're going to look at them in more detail in future slides. 92% perpetrated by outsiders. So the other way to look at that, only 8% of breaches were perpetrated by either insiders or partners. Almost every single breach, the majority of all the breaches reported, 92% were actually perpetrated by outsiders, no one internal to the company. And here it says 14% was committed by insiders. So here's another one that you're going, that doesn't really add up. Well, maybe some of these insiders were assisting outsiders, so therefore that's why these two rows add up to more than 100%. Good thing to note, only 1% were implicated by business partners. So the business partners that corporations have, such as a consulting company or something to that effect, they are not the ones that are causing the breaches or breaching companies that they're working for. 7% involved multiple parties, a lot of different people involved in the breach, and 19% attributed to state-affiliated actors. And here you can see this is a big one right here. It's a plus. It went up quite a bit over the last few years, and the reason for that is because China is the biggest perpetrator in these state-affiliated breaches, and their involvement is rising. And what are they going after? IP, intellectual property, is what China is looking at, and also any other state-affiliated actor is looking for intellectual property. Okay, one more overview. Who are the victims of these breaches? Well, one of the top victims is 37% of breaches affected financial organizations, banks specifically. And I will mention it right now. The reason why banks were the number ones affected is, yes, they have money. So yeah, a lot of people are looking at money. But the main failure here, meaning what most of the attackers used to accomplish the breach on financial organizations, were ATM skimmers. And skimmers are just those little overlay things that you can put on top of an ATM card reader. So what it does is when you stick your card into the ATM, the skimmer reads your card before it actually gets all the way into the ATM. And on top of that, it has a little video camera, so it watches you type your password. So there you go. It simply sits there, reads your card as you push it through the ATM, and captures your password both at the same time. So it's got not only your ATM card information, but also your password. These are pretty hard to detect. The ATM can't really detect them because it doesn't really have any sensors to say, hey, something's attached to me. Also, it doesn't know that your card has just been read by another device because your card, it doesn't work that way. It just has a magnetic strip. It doesn't have any sort of data saying, hey, I was just read one split second ago. So these cards, ATM cards that we're using, are not smart cards. All right, so that is the big reason why financial organizations are at the top of the list in terms of most breached. It's because of those card skimmers. 24% of breaches occurred in retail environments and restaurants. That's actually down a little bit. 20% of network intrusions, and I want to mention here, network intrusions, they're splitting this out in the report because the network intrusions does not include the card skimmers. So since a large majority of the report includes card skimmers, the way to break that out so all the data doesn't include card skimmers is by simply saying of network intrusions, because card skimmers on ATMs is not a network intrusion. So 20% of network intrusions involved manufacturing, transportation, and utilities. That is up a little bit. 20% of network intrusions hit information and professional services firms, and 38% of breaches impacted larger organizations. That's up a little bit as well. One thing to note, it says the ratio among organizational sizes is fairly even this time around, meaning that large and small organizations were breached fairly evenly. 27 different countries are represented, meaning that companies that were breached or even governments that were breached were located in 27 different countries. All this data does not come just from the United States alone. And how do these breaches occur? Well, 52% used some sort of actual hacking. That is down a little bit. And what we're saying here is the 1-2 combo of hacking and malware struck less often. What do we mean by the 1-2 combo of hacking and malware? Well, the 1-2 combo simply means that a user receives some malware either by clicking on a malicious site or getting a link in an email. They get infected with malware, and from there, that gives the attacker a foothold into the company by breaching that user's computer, and then they're able to perform their hack, which financial industry or even for countries that are looking for information, they will do the same thing, and then they'll want to go and find data on a server. So it's this 1-2 combo of first infecting a computer. From there, that gains then entry into the company, and then they can do their hack, which would be to get into a server that holds the data they're looking for. And it says it's less often, definitely isn't down for the count. If you're filtering out the large number of physical ATM skimming incidents shows exploitation of weak and stolen credentials still standing in the ring. So a big thing here, and we'll look at that data in just a second, is bad or stolen credentials is one of the main ways that hackers are, or companies are getting hacked into. And that's right here, actually. 76% of network intrusions exploited weak or stolen credentials. That is a little bit down, and again, the only reason why that's down is because of the ATM skimmer. 40% of incorporated malware, 35% involved some sort of physical attack, and again, I know I'm going to say this probably way too many times, but the majority of these physical attacks were the ATM skimmers. So most of the time it wasn't some other type of physical attack. The majority of physical attacks were ATM skimmers. 29% leveraged some sort of social tactic, and 13% resulted from some sort of privilege misuse and abuse. And this one we'll look at in a future slide, but this could be a little misleading. It's not because we've got some evil sysadmin, it's for some other reason. So I'll keep you waiting on that one and explain it when we get to that slide. All right, so let's start looking at some of these fun numbers. Finance is leading the way, and that is because of our skimmers. So you can see out of the 621 total reported breaches, 230 of those 621 breaches affected the finance industry. And this particular chart is broken into the industry, the victim industry, and also by employee count. So we have the top row is smaller organizations all the way up to 100, going all the way up to organizations that have more than 100,000. So what you'll notice here, the majority of the finance breaches included large finance companies, meaning large banks were the ones that were the victims of the ATM skimmers. But a really interesting thing to note here, when we ignore those skimmers, because there's other breaches as well, is that look how many companies, 193 companies, which is the most out of all sized companies, like 193, you would consider these very small companies. 193 small companies, companies with less than 100 people, had some sort of security breach, which I think is kind of not something that most people would have guessed. I would say most people think breaches occur and happen to these medium to large size businesses. But according to this report, 193 small companies out of the 621 reported, so that's a pretty big percentage there, right? A third of them, a third of the reported companies were small companies. And the majority of those small companies, the industry that was affected the most for small business was retail. So small retail companies, meaning like your little mom and pop downtown stores, those were the ones that were affected the most in terms of security breaches. Let's see, any other interesting information? Yes. This is kind of the one that's kind of the bummer of the whole report. The unknowns. We're going to see quite a few unknowns because not all of the data reported by all of the partners included information such as how large the organization was. Another piece that wasn't reported all the time was what industry they were in. So you will see there's 136 out of the 621 reported breaches. We just don't know how big the company is that got breached. And also we don't know 31 out of those 621, we don't know what industry those companies were in that got breached. So there's quite a bit of unknown here, and that's just because it was reported by a whole variety of different companies, and maybe some of those companies that did the reporting really didn't want to give up the information about how big that company was and what industry they were in, because maybe that would have given away too much information about who that actual company was. So that's probably why these two numbers are, kind of big. All right, anything else interesting? Let's go on to the next slide. So, very important fact that was discovered during this report is that there's a very clear and important difference across industries with respect to motives that will factor prominently throughout this report. And when we say motives, we're saying why was the breach done? And we've broken it up into 4 different groups. So, the first reason would be the breach occurred purely for financial gains, or the breach occurred purely for espionage. That would be a very good example, and the primary thing in this report for espionage was China breaching into different businesses here in the United States to steal their intellectual property. Next would be activism, anonymous, other different groups of other hacker groups that get together and bring websites down or steal data because they're unhappy or they want to make some sort of statement. And then the final category would be other, and that would be either we don't really know why they did the breach or some other reason. I would say the primary reason the others would be here is because we don't really know. Okay, so now that we know the different categories of why the breach took place, what was the major reason for the attacker performing the attack? Well, we will see the very top one in this color here indicates financial. So the top breach occurring was financially motivated, and the target was retail companies. So now you might go, wait, I just thought you said it was banking that was the biggest target. Yes, it was. But what we did here in this report was they filtered for purely network intrusions, which means they filtered out those ATM skimmers for this report. So forget about all those ATM skimmers, and you go to pure network intrusions, meaning that it wasn't a physical attack, it was some sort of attack that included someone getting into a network purely by either malware or some sort of hacking. The biggest breach was retail. Retail was the most affected with 21%. And as you can see, the motivator, the giant motivator here was purely for financial gains. Okay, maybe a little tiny bit of other. The next one down would be manufacturing. So the industry, again ignoring the finance industry and the skimmers, manufacturing was number 2 with 12% of all the breaches involving a network intrusion occurred in the manufacturing industry. And you can see here that the majority of the reason why the attacker, their goal of attacking the manufacturing industry was purely for espionage reasons. So you'll see there's I don't see any financial reason here. The main reason was for espionage, and you'll see also a little tiny bit of other, meaning we didn't know. Third would be the information industry. Information such as some sort of consulting firm, maybe even Verizon that puts together these type of these reports. So any type of information gathering company or a company that publishes reports. This one is mixed in terms of why someone broke into companies in this industry. Part of it for financial reasons, part of it for espionage, part of it for activism, and part of it for other. So let's go on and look at other interesting ones. Food service, purely financial. That's it. The only reason why a group performed an attack on the food services industry was purely for financial reasons, financial gains. No espionage at all. So I guess China just does not care about McDonald's secret sauce or anything like that. They're looking for the money. And actually I should kind of say that China wasn't part of the financial side in terms of why they did the attacks. It was purely for espionage, to get particular data about an industry. All right, let's see, anything else? Public. So public and other services and information. I wanted to kind of look at what are our activists targeting. So what industry as our activists, our anonymous and our other activist groups, who are they targeting? Well, looks like they're targeting mostly the information. Maybe another good one would be news services. That would be an information industry. So they're targeting the information industry, the public sector. Remember when they targeted the BART service, and also other services, and finally a little tiny bit of healthcare. Okay, but the big takeaway from this slide would be retail is being attacked purely for financial reasons. Manufacturing is being attacked almost completely for espionage reasons. All right, next. So victim industry by employee count. This is filtered out purely just for espionage. So the groups that are purely trying to get intellectual property out of a company. Again, this is the primary actor in this would be China. So what is China doing? This is kind of what this slide really should say. What is their main target? Let's see, is it small companies less than 100? Is it medium to large, or supersized? Let's see who it is. It would look like the kind of the middle of the road, the 1,000 to 10,000. So this would be pretty big companies. So 36 companies in the pretty large space, followed by the medium, 100 to 1,000. So companies with 100 to 1,000 employees would be the second biggest target. So when we look at this is just how many people are in the company, meaning the size of the company. So maybe it'd be also more interesting to see which column is having the most activity. And what they did for us was they kind of highlighted it. So this would be the cell with the most activity. So if we look, we would say, oh, look, transportation. So the transportation industry was targeted for espionage reasons, meaning that a country wanted to get data about information about the transportation industry. But again, the number one would be across the board, and it looks like it was pretty somewhat even across sizes of companies, was that espionage breaches were particularly targeting the manufacturing industry. And you can see 40 incidents out of 120. So again, a third of all the incidents in terms of espionage breaches were targeting the manufacturing industry, followed by the professional industry, so the consultants. And why do you think these two are tied together? Well, probably because the professional industry, the consultants, also have some information on the manufacturing side. So the countries that are targeting this, again, China mostly, they're no dummies. They know that if they want to get information, they can go directly to the manufacturing companies, but they can also get information about the manufacturing companies from the companies that provide professional services to the manufacturing companies. So I would say these two are very related in terms of the data that China is looking for specifically, which is intellectual property. All right, next. Well, this is important to know because this is the reason and the way to categorize different breaches. We need to know who the actors are, meaning who's doing the breaching, what are the actions, how are they accomplishing these breaches, what assets, meaning what assets are our actors targeting, and finally the attributes, how is that asset being affected once it's targeted. So those are the four things. When a breach occurs, we want to answer all four of those questions and basically fill in the details for all four of these attributes for when any particular breach occurs. So what we have next is a graph, once again, including all four of these particular attributes. So we've got actors, actions, assets, and attributes. That can be read as the actors. Down here at the bottom, our actors are either external, internal, or partner. Our action would be how they are accomplishing their intrusion, would be malware, hacking, social misuse, or physical, or error, or environmental, it looks like. Assets would be server, network, user, media, people. And attributes is what is being compromised on this particular asset. And here's our CIA triad again: confidentiality, integrity, and the availability. That is what's being compromised on the particular asset. So let's look at these a little bit here. What are some of these assets? Well, server, that makes sense. Network makes sense. User, okay. We have user and people. How are these two different? Well, user, we're referring specifically to user devices, laptops, desktops, that kind of stuff. Media, that should be pretty self-sufficient, should be able to describe itself right there, but the media is the maybe USB drives, but the thing that isn't as obvious would be media also includes DVDs, CDs, but also faxes, and maybe any even sort of letters or paper documents. So information security breaches happen and occur with different types of media. And then finally, people. Well, the people would be a target. They're the asset in the company, and they are usually always tricked with social engineering. Okay, so now that we understand what all this means, this is a really good view into what happened with all these breaches. So let's look at some of the top ones. 48% would be the biggest percentage. So 48%, that means that we had some sort of external hacking occur specifically on a server, and the server that, when it was compromised, what happened was the confidentiality of the data on the server was compromised. So another way to say that is some external person using some hacking method compromised our server and retrieved confidential data off of that server. That was the main attack. From there, 41% was, again, external hacking, and what they did was they compromised the integrity of our server. Maybe they changed the data in some way, so now we don't have data that is correct anymore. What else we got? 35%, so you can see these are grouped quite a bit. Lots of server activity, mostly involving malware and hacking. Here's a really interesting thing though. Look, how much of our server breaches or our information security breaches affected the network? Almost none. So the network was not an asset that was targeted in most of these security breaches that were reported for this report. Only 1% and 1%, and that was external physical. What else wasn't represented very well? Meaning, what other piece was not used to breach information security systems? Well, media. Media is also very underrepresented here. The main things that were targeted were servers, users, meaning user devices, and followed by people. So using social engineering. So I thought that was a pretty interesting an interesting chart. So this one actually breaks out this last chart a little bit, just so you can see it in terms of why these hacks or attacks were occurring. So these include for financial reasons, meaning that the attack was performed to get money. This one, espionage, to get information. This one was activism, to show their displeasure. And this one was other. All right, so we can see espionage, the main thing that was compromised when the main data, when we were looking for data, intellectual property data, was the attacker looked and compromised the server, the user, and the people, pretty much straight across the board. For financial gain, the main thing that was accomplished was, the main thing that was attacked was users and physical. So user, device, physical. Well, in this case, this main little dot right here, yep, you guessed it, it was those ATM skimmers. So even though the ATM is not a personal device in terms of something that a person owns, it is a device that a user needs to use to get data out. So this was the number one here, was the ATM skimmers. All right, what else we got? So we've got servers, users, people, malware, hacking. So hacking, again, is a big thing, and physical. All right, well, let's look at the next slide. Okay, so here is a really good overview in terms of what has happened across the years. So jumping all the way up to here, we can see that, again, like I said earlier, 92% of all of the exploits came from external sources. Only 14% came from internal sources, and again, it adds up more than 100%, but that's okay, we know why. How has that changed throughout the years? Well, back in 2008, you can see there was a lot more internal going on, and that continued into 2009. 48% of all breaches reported included some sort of internal threat. And then look at this dramatic drop in 2010, even a bigger drop in 2011, and then it kind of went up just a little bit in 2012. Some reasons for some of these changes actually is because who is doing the reporting. Remember, I listed those over 20 different partners are doing reporting. Well, more and more partners are doing more and more reporting each year, and some of those partners might be reporting more in terms of breaches that occur externally, just simply because of the nature of what they do report. So let's say maybe Deloitte just started reporting this year, and their report may include more data, and their let's say their investigations include more external type of hack than other groups that might do more internal investigations that include more internal people. So what I'm trying to say is the data might not be changing as drastically as we see here. It may be because of the different groups that are doing the reporting. But what we should focus on is, I would say, at least these last 2 years, because more and more data is being reported throughout the years. So our data should be getting a lot better in terms of what really is happening out there in the real world. And what we can see is pretty consistently, at least the last 3 years, again, most of our breaches occur because of external threats, not because of internal threats. That's the big takeaway there. All right, so threat actors. We've got our external, internal, and partner. We already know that our internal is the main threat. So we can see overall, meaning the combination of small and large companies, overall 92% are external. And they broke this up just to show you that, well, if it's internal versus external, is there a difference between small and large companies? And the answer is yes. There is a little bit more internal breaches, meaning internal people are committing the breach more in small companies than internal people are committing the breaches in large companies. So that's kind of an interesting little fact right there. One note that the report did make was the big reason for the dominance of external actors are the numerical advantage and greater attack scalability. An organization will always have more outsiders than insiders. Well, yeah. And the internet connects criminals to virtually limitless hosts of potential victims. So the reason why there's more external attacks taking place is just simply because there's a lot more external people. That makes a lot of sense. So it's not just because your internal people, meaning your actual employees, are better. Maybe that's one reason, but the bigger reason is just because there's a lot fewer of them than there are external people. So that's a pretty good note to make right there. All right, so a variety of different external actors. We've got one of the main external actor is organized crime. So we've kind of been saying external, 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 but who really are the people that are doing these breaches? Well, main one, external crime, organized crime. They're the ones that are doing the majority of the breaches. 55% overall are breaches that are occurring because of organized crime. And what is their main goal? Financial gain. Well, what is the second actor? That would be the state-affiliated, meaning country-sponsored attacks. What is their main goal? Espionage. Okay. And then we've got some unknowns. We're not quite sure why they're doing it. So this would be attacks that we haven't or have not been fully investigated in terms of they know it occurred, but they're not quite sure who did it yet. Unaffiliated. And we can see activist is really small. So overall, the activists aren't the ones that are doing this confirmed breaches and stealing data. Less than 1% here for small companies, and actually 1% for large companies. Those are former employers. So people who have been working there and maybe they were just fired and their credentials weren't taken away. Oops. They would be the ones that would be the internal, or they're now external, but they might probably still have their credentials, so they're able to break in. Or another way they get in is because they have created some sort of backdoor in the software or the system configuration that they used to be in charge of, and that has not been turned off. Okay, so I've been blaming China for the espionage, and the reason why I'm doing that is just because of this report. So here they did a study of the origin of external actors, meaning the origin of external attacks, where did they come from? The majority of them came from China, 30%. That's not that big compared to second place Romania. Romania was 28%. But there's a big difference between why they did their attacks. So China, the main reason why they did their attack was purely for espionage, meaning getting that intellectual property. Romania, their main reason for performing attacks is for financial gain. Followed by the United States. So it should be obvious by now that this isn't state-sponsored attacks. These are just the origin of different attacks. So the United States definitely has its share of organized crime, and the organized criminals in the United States are primarily going after financial data. So that's third place, followed by Bulgaria, Russia, Netherlands, Armenia, Germany, Colombia, Brazil. What can you see out of all this data? Well, almost all the countries listed here are performing their breaches primarily for financial gain, except for China. China, a little tiny bit of financial. The main reason why perpetrators from China are doing these particular attacks is for espionage. All right. One other note here is, let's see. Yeah, 96% of espionage cases were attributed to actors in China. And what we're saying is that these are state-sponsored attacks. Okay, so we're going to profile that actor, that threat actor, a little bit more here. What do we see? Well, the victim industry primarily finance, retail, and food. They are being targeted by organized crime. State affiliated, we've got the victim industry that's being targeted by state affiliated attackers, would be manufacturing, professional, and transportation. And this should be apparent because we kind of looked at some of this data in previous slides. And then the activists, what are they targeting? They're targeting information public and other type of services. Where's the region of operation? Meaning, where are these companies located that are being attacked? Eastern Europe and North America for organized crime. State affiliated, China. I think I said that backwards. Sorry about that. I meant Eastern Europe and North America are the perpetrators that are attacking these industries. And East Asia, particularly China, is the perpetrator attacking manufacturing, professional, and transportation. Common actions, and this is what's pretty interesting, is you'll notice that the actions between the organized crime and the state affiliated aren't exactly the same. Common action for organized crime is tampering, physical tampering. What is that? What have I been saying over and over again? The main thing against finance? Yes, tampering of ATMs. So again, this big piece right here is those ATM skimmers. So how else is organized crime attacking finance, retail, and food industries to get data, financial data? Brute force. Most of it is brute force hacking. So they're going after and trying to brute force their way in, primarily by breaking passwords. Another thing they do is some sort of spyware, malware. So they're having people click on links or get things in email. Spyware is being installed. Captured stored data, adminware, and RAM scrapers. These are all nice tools that organized crime uses. State affiliated. So how is this different? So state affiliated, they're doing more backdoor. So they are installing malware that is more backdoor oriented, meaning that once it's installed, it allows the hacker, the attacker, to get onto a system that has just been compromised, and from there look at the entire manufacturing, professional, transportation business. They also have C2, also known as command control. They use that quite a bit. They will export all the data they find. They have some sort of password dumper, a downloader, stolen credentials. So you can notice state affiliated is using some different tricks than organized crime is. So what would that tell you if you were in one of these particular industries? Well, you would probably be looking for, if you're in finance, retail, food, you'd be looking for these type of attacks. And if you're in manufacturing, professional, transportation, you'd be looking for these type of attacks. And that's why it's a really good idea for you, and also companies, to read about this report and kind of, profile your attacker. If you know who's attacking you and why they're attacking you and how they're attacking you, then you're going to have a much better defense than if you're just kind of throwing up all kinds of defenses randomly because, maybe the manufacturer is telling you that you should buy it. All right, another interesting thing, activists, what do they like the best? Ooh, they like SQL injection. And you'll notice that organized crime and state affiliated, they're not even using SQL injection. So I thought that was interesting as well. Targeted assets. So organized crime, main thing they're going after, ATMs, tampering, ATMs. They're also looking at point of sale controllers, point of sale terminals, databases, yeah, because that's where all the financial data could be stored, and desktops. That is a lot different than state affiliated. They're not looking at ATMs. They're looking at laptop desktops, file servers. Notice file servers not over here, but file servers here. Why are state affiliated espionage type people looking for file servers? Well, because that's where all the important data is stored. The intellectual property stored on file servers. Mail servers, also a good source of intellectual property. So state affiliated, looking at the mail servers. Organized crime, not looking at the mail servers, not looking at the file servers. So again, depending on what industry you're in, you should be looking at what of your assets should be most protected. I'm not saying that if you are in finance, you shouldn't be protecting your file server. That's definitely not the case. But you should look at what your most targeted assets are, and that's where you should put the bulk of your safeguards. Okay, so this should be obvious down here. The desired data, organized crime. Yes, payment cards. They're looking for credentials so they can log in and get more bank information. And, of course, bank account info. State affiliated. Well, they're looking for credentials. Why are they looking for credentials? So once they get and they infect one particular machine with a backdoor, they can then log on to a file server and get what they're really after. So they're looking for credentials first. Then they're looking for internal data, because that's what they're there for. That's why they're doing their attack, which includes trade secrets and also system info. They want system info so they know which file servers to attack. What file servers hold those trade secrets. And then our activists, what are they looking for? Personal information. Why are they looking for personal information? Because they are mad at a particular company and they want to humiliate that company by posting personal information such as name, phone number, address, social security number. They are doing that simply to make that company look bad. Credentials, they want to make companies look bad because they're not happy with how they're protecting their customers' credentials, so they'll post credentials. And then internal organization data, they want to find out who the top people are in the company so then they can post their personal info. So I like this slide quite a bit because what you would do if you're in an industry, you kind of go, okay, who's attacking me? How are they attacking me? What are they attacking? And what are they trying to get out of this attack? And you could notice it's different based upon not only what industry you're in, but also who's doing the attacking. So this is really, really important stuff. Okay, another little note. Data theft involving programmers, administrators, or executives certainly makes for interesting anecdotes, really good news stories, right? But it is still less common in our overall data set than incidents driven by employees with little to no technical aptitude or organizational power. So that just means that our internal people that are the ones that are responsible for this data theft really aren't our top admins or execs. They're actually just kind of our worker bees, such as our cashier, right? So our cashier, 40% of our internal actors, meaning the people that were internally responsible for breaches, 40% of those people were cashiers. So how did cashier do this if they are not, necessarily knowledgeable with the entire makeup of the computer, the technology behind the whole business? Well, what can they do? Cashier handles money. Okay, that's one thing. But cashiers also handle credit cards, right? So what they can do is they can get a little handheld credit card reader, and they will swipe a card in the credit card reader, store that data, and then swipe it for the person to make their purchase. So cashier definitely does some of that. End users, they also may be the ones that are perpetrating the internal breaches, either knowingly or unknowingly, and that's actually true for our system admin and system administrators. What they found was that the administrator, most of these breaches caused by the system administrator, particularly 8 out of the 13 incidents where the system administrator was found out to be the internal perpetrator of the breach, 8 out of those 13 incidents was actually accidental. So the administrator wasn't acting purposefully to cause this breach. It was an accidental mistake on their part that allowed a perpetrator to get to the data. So system admin, we don't have all these evil system admins running around, but we do. Maybe we have some incompetent system admins running around that are not doing things the way they should be. I would say probably this would be particularly installing software and leaving the default password. Duh, shouldn't be doing that. Okay, so more interesting information here. The note is something that they see over and over again, year after year, is repetitious attacks that they see over and over again. And they're categorizing them first as something called a point of sale smash and grab. Particularly what they do is they do some sort of brute force and malware combination. So brute force to steal a password to get in, and then malware that they install on that device. So that would be 111 of the incidents of the 621 breaches. 111 of them are point of sale smash and grab. 190, so here's the actual data that I've been saying over and over again of those ATM skimmers. 190 involved ATM skimmers, so that would be the physical ATM breach. And then also 120, something called assured penetration technique, which would basically be phishing, then malware, and then hacking. So what they do is the hacker sends out a phishing email. Some user responds to that, and unfortunately that's where the malware gets installed, and then they perform their hack from that compromised internal system. So this group, point of sale smash and grab, physical ATM, and assured penetration testing, there were 421 incidences that you can classify as one of these three things, which means that is 68% of all breaches involved one of these three type of things. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, threat action categories over time. So again, what is changing throughout the years? So back in 2008, we saw a lot of hacking and malware. Not a lot of physical, meaning not a lot of skimmers. And then 2009, still pretty even, not very much physical. 2010, hacking and malware were pretty even. Whoop, look, physical shot up quite a bit. But then in 2011, physical went way back down again. And then we had physical shoot way up. So those ATM skimmers have become very, very popular. And that's why our physical shot up from 10% all the way up to 35%. What else is interesting here? Ooh, social. So you can see that we kind of had social 29, 28, and then we had it, looks like maybe a little more under control, 11%, down to 7%, and it jumped all the way back up to 29%. So social is definitely making a big rebound here in terms of what is occurring and why. Threat actions and categories. All right, so overall, most of these threats are occurring because of some sort of hacking going on. And hacking is a favorite thing of both people going after financial data and also people going after doing espionage to get intellectual property. So that's kind of split. What else is jumping out here? Well, let's see, malware. Mostly being affecting small companies rather than large companies. Hacking also mostly affecting small companies rather than large companies, quite a bit more. However, physical is the #1 threat action against a large company. Why? ATM skimmers. I know that's going to get old pretty soon, but that's why the #1 thing, if it was for physical, for large companies, is ATM skimmers. Let's see, what else do we got here? Let's move to the next one, shall we? Okay, so top 20 threat actions. #1 is tampering. And that is primarily affecting our large groups. Main reason, financial. Spyware is #2 with 30%. That's split between finance and espionage. So our organized crime and our state-sponsored intrusions are favored. They're favoring spyware, both of them. So they're both using spyware, I would say, quite evenly between finance and espionage goals. Backdoor export data, use of stolen credentials. Most of that is used by people who are trying to commit espionage. All the way down to financial again. So we can see here that financial, main thing they're using is tampering, right? The low tech, spyware, and brute force. That's their main things to actually gain their access for financial reasons. And you can see the espionage. The interesting thing here is they're using quite a few different tools for to breach systems. So if you look at this, which one would you say is more sophisticated? People who are trying to steal financial data, or people who are committing espionage and steal intellectual property? Well, you can see most of it is this lighter green. So you can see that people who are committing espionage are using a variety of different tools. Our financial people, or in other words, our organized crime, are using a fewer different tools. And if you look at them, I would say most of them are less sophisticated. The ATM skimmers are sophisticated in terms of a physical device, but their sophistication in terms of online hacking is limited to spyware and brute force mainly. What else do we see? Spyware mostly affecting, again, small versus large companies. 34% brute force. So what would that tell you? Since we see here most hacking is brute force against small companies rather than large companies, well, that's probably because small companies aren't doing enough timing out, meaning that maybe small companies are allowing the external hacker to hit their site repetitively trying to guess a password. So that would be something that stands out for me at least. In a streak that remains unbroken, direct installation of malware by an attacker who has gained access to a system is again the most common vector. And that makes sense. Once you own the system, it'll need some fancy accessories. So once you own the system, what is the thing done the most after that system gets owned? Well, it would be direct install of malware. So the system is owned, you now can get to it, then you do your install. That is followed by email attachments. So malware is getting installed onto computers that have been breached by an email attachment. That's number 2. What else can we see here? Direct install is being affected mostly by small versus large companies. Large companies are mostly getting malware installed via email attachments first over direct install, whereas small companies are getting direct installed after that computer has been compromised instead of that malware being installed via an email attachment. Okay, next. In the land of financially motivated breaches, spyware, which includes keyloggers, is king. So financially motivated attackers use keyloggers. That's their favorite thing. On the espionage side of the ocean, there is no king. There is instead fairly equal representation across many malware varieties. All right, so what does that tell us? Well, finance guys, the guys that are breaking into financial systems, mostly organized crime, they are using really just one type of spyware, keyloggers. Why are they doing that? Well, why do they need to do that? Well, they can stick with one tool, because if they're looking simply just for financial data, there's plenty of it. They can go to many different companies, different websites, and from there launch their attack against many different companies. So they can take their one tool, and if it doesn't work at one spot, they just move on to another site, and another site, and another site, until finally they find a company that is susceptible to a breach using a keylogger. On the espionage side, they are a little more targeted. So China is looking for a particular company, and they need to breach that particular company. So if one tool doesn't work, they can't just simply move on to another company to target. They need to switch tools, switch tactics. So the reason why these two are different is because if you're looking for financial data, organized crime, just move on to the next company. Espionage, they're targeting one specific company, so they need a variety of different tools. All right, so here's the numbers. Like we said, spyware keyloggers being used both by finance and espionage targets equally. But then you can see, look, it's pretty much dominated by the espionage side of things. Most espionage-related attacks involve a variety of different tools. Backdoors, they export data, they capture stored data, C2, downloader, password dumper, rootkits. They're using all kinds of different malware tools when they are attacking for espionage purposes. If data could start a riot, occupy passwords. We could use these statistics to overthrow single-factor passwords. So we've been saying in class over and over again, single-factor not good, bad, because it could be easily guessed. People use bad passwords, people reuse passwords, all kind of bad stuff happens when you're just authenticating with the single thing, which is the password. So single-factor password, the supreme ruler in the world of authentication. Right, just kind of the joke that, yes, most authentication nowadays is relying on simply one single password, a password. So that means single-factor authentication, not multi-factor authentication. If we could collectively accept a suitable replacement to single-factor authentication, it would have forced about 80% of these attacks to adapt or die. So 80% of the attacks are relying on single-factor passwords. And here's the data. So, variety of hacking actions. Number 1, use of stolen credentials. And that is a big problem. And that's because stolen credentials could be, that includes bad passwords, leaked passwords, passwords stolen from other sites, and also, unfortunately, default passwords. So if we were able to get rid of this, that would definitely cut down quite a bit of actions of opportunity of hacking. Also, brute force, that's related to passwords. So brute forcing a password, trying to guess the password, that is also up here. So, and remember we said, who favors brute forcing their way into a system? The people that are after financial data, specifically organized crime. Espionage, again, they kind of favor stolen credentials or also use of backdoors. SQL injection, not quite as much. It's kind of split between financial, espionage, and activism, but we can see that one little dark piece there. We have already said that activism favors SQL injection. All right. More than 95% of all attacks tied to state-affiliated espionage employed phishing as a means of establishing a foothold in their intended victim systems. So espionage is relying almost completely on phishing to gain their initial foothold into the environment. That is just sad because how are we going to protect against that? Not very good answers except for user training. So so here's the numbers. So the variety of social actions to gain access into a system, into an environment. Phishing is number 1, and you can see espionage is using that quite a bit. Bribery, number 2. Extortion, pretexting, these are really not used often at all. Most of it has to do with sending out a email, a phishing email, to have a user click on it, and then that installs software. Not good. Vector for social action. So we had, what is the social action? Number one, phishing. Well, guess what? How do phishing attempts occur? You got it, email. That wasn't very surprising. So yeah, the vector of the most common vector to accomplish some sort of social engineering. Well, since it involves phishing emails, it is over email, followed by a very, very distant second place of in-person. In-person, remember, in the second thing for variety of social action, bribery. Well, yeah, bribery takes place in person. So there you go. That's the vector. So now we know the most common way for social engineering to take hold into our environment. It is via email, and email specifically are phishing emails. So now we know what we need to do to protect our environment. We need to look at those emails, and we need to train our users to not fall for phishing. Haven't we been saying this for years and years and years, yet it still works? Darn. Job security. Targets of social actions. Okay, so social action, number one social action, still phishing via email. So who is the target? Well, the number one, unfortunately, is unknown. And the reason for that is because all the studies that went into comprising this report, the compilers of the report didn't get very good data in terms of all of the targets. So there's this giant category of unknowns, which is kind of unfortunate because we would like to know who is being targeted specifically. So 69% unknown. That really doesn't do very much good for looking at the rest of these numbers, because 69% is a pretty big number. It could drastically affect any of these numbers. But let's ignore that for a minute. So ignoring unknowns, let's look at number two, which would be our executives. So our executives are the ones that are being targeted with phishing emails, and that makes sense because, no, our executives aren't dumb. That's not the reason. The reason is because they have access to quite a few systems. So once you gain a foothold into onto their personal device, you can start monitoring what they're doing and put a keylogger on there. You can log all of the passwords they use for all the different sites they have access to, which usually includes quite a few. And quite a few that who's interested in the data that executives are looking for? You guessed it. People that are performing espionage, meaning they are looking at sensitive data, intellectual property data. They know that the executives have access to it, so that's who they target with their phishing emails. How does this possibly still happen, and how often, how many emails do you really need to send before someone clicks on a phishing scam? Well, this study was performed by ThreatSim. So if you looked up ThreatSim, they had this campaign called Phishing for Hire. So you could hire ThreatSim to come in and see how well your employees did when presented with a phishing email. And what they found was number of emails per campaign versus probability of at least one click. Well, 2's not enough. That's pretty low probability, only 20% probability if they sent out 2 emails, they'd actually get 1 click. But you don't have to go up very high till you get pretty good response rate. So once you send out 12 emails, or once this company sent out 12 phishing emails, it was pretty darn close. I would give that greater than 95% chance that there would be at least one person that would click on that phishing email and therefore give the attacker a foothold into that system. So it's not like we have to flood the place. So if you think that an attacker needs to send in hundreds of emails to get someone to click on at least one, that is not the case. And attackers are discovering that. They can see that they can send as few as 12 to, if they get all the way up to 16, which really isn't all that different, that many emails, they're at 100% likelihood that at least one person will click on one of those 18 emails. So my takeaway here for me and for you would be that you shouldn't be looking for a flood of phishing emails because attackers know they don't need to flood of emails. That will only raise suspicion. So there could only be a few specifically targeted phishing emails, and with sending only 18 of those, they're pretty much 100% guaranteed that they'll at least get one person to click on it and accomplish their goal of gaining a foothold onto that system. So I thought this was pretty interesting because it doesn't take all that many emails for them to successfully phish and catch one of the people that are trying to infect a machine. Next, despite repeated calls to immediately disable access as a part of standard employee termination processes, cases of disgruntled ex-employees abusing still active privileges make our data set every year. We'll say it again. If you take them off the payroll, take them out of your systems too. So, what they are finding is people who have been fired are the ones that are coming back in and doing some sort of misuse, which will allow them to compromise the system. So this is very easy to solve, like we saw on the last slide. If you get rid of the person, immediately remove their credentials. And unfortunately, that's not still happening. So we've got this privilege abuse. This privilege abuse is mostly from people who have been fired or are thinking about quitting or are looking at starting a competitor company. So these aren't just your random people who are just kind of mad. These are people who have quit or are quitting and are then using their privileges to gain access into systems that they shouldn't and steal data. So good takeaway there. The vector for misuse actions would be physical access. So what would that be? Maybe walking away with a hard drive, walking away with a laptop, walking away with a USB stick. So again, kind of low tech. And then that's followed by LAN access. Skimmers installed inside ATMs, point-of-sale devices, and gas pump terminals comprise almost all incidents in the physical category. See figure 31. We didn't look at that. And it's not surprising then that tampering is the most common variety of physical action. So yeah, we've seen this before. I only highlighted ATM skimmers, but there's also point of sale device skimmers, gas pump skimmers. Gas pump skimmers meaning, the point of sale device that you find outside of the gas station, right at the gas pump. People can put skimmers on that as well, so be careful. All right, so here's the data. Different variety of physical access. Main one would be tampering, and when we say tampering, specifically those skimming devices. All right, surveillance, theft, so small, not even worth mentioning. Moving on. All right, we're almost done here. Getting to the final slides. So, compromised asset categories over time. So, how are things changing? Before, it was the asset that was being targeted almost all the time, 94% of the time. Back in 2008 was the server. How has that changed to today? Well, our user devices are now the ones that are most targeted, followed by server. So our user devices are the ones, our laptops, our desktops, are being targeted, compromised first. And then from there, people be getting to servers. But user targeting most frequently. But notice this trend as well. People are hovering around 12, 10, 7%, and then all of a sudden, in 2012, that jumps all the way up to 29%. So social engineering has really taken a jump too in the last, just in this last year. So more people are also being targeted as by attackers, hackers, as an asset. So that is an interesting trend as well. Oh, wrong way. Okay. Variety of compromised assets. So here's the numbers. Our ATM, number 1, skimmers, number 2, desktops, like we said, number 2 is our user, followed by file servers, laptop. Again, that's a user device. So here's our user devices, our desktops, our laptops, point of sale terminal. What else? So ATM, yes. And then what are our servers? Would be our file server, our mail server, our directory server, our point of sale server. All of these things are compromised assets related to server. And then finally, people. What are our people? We've got end users, executives, and managers, and former employees are all also assets that have been targeted. And when we look at it, number 1 again, like I said, ATM, but that comprises completely our financially motivated attackers. Our espionage attackers aren't using the ATM. What they're using are desktops, file servers, all kinds of variety of different assets that the espionage attackers are going after. And one more interesting thing here, you can see ATM, mostly large companies, not really small companies, because ATMs, what the attackers are doing is they're looking at common ATMs, because what they can do then is mass produce a skimmer and affix it to as many ATMs as possible, as opposed to if they were going after smaller companies, well, those aren't a big target, so therefore they'd probably have to do a lot of customization. So large companies with ATMs is what our financial people are going after. There's a striking correlation between threat actor motives and the variety of data compromised. The profiteers favor payment and personal information that can easily be converted into cash. So financial, yes, they're looking at personal information. Spy types prefer trade secrets. Spy types, again, are people going after personal trade information. Internal organizational data and system information. Hacktivists like the titillating aspect of personal information and internal organizational data. Credentials are fun for the whole family. So all of the different actors like to go after credentials, and here's that data. So what we have is our different motivations behind the breaches, financial espionage activisms, and you can see financial. They are looking at payment information. Well, yeah, duh, because that's why it's called financial. And then they also are not ignoring credentials, because if they gain credentials, then they can also gain access to financial information. Our espionage, they are looking at a variety of things. They want credentials. They want to gain access to the system. And of course, they want internal information. And they're looking for, particularly the end result, they want the secrets. Variety of compromised data. Number 1 thing that's being compromised out of those millions of records that I mentioned at the very, very beginning of this long lecture is payment data. That's what's being compromised, number 1. Number 2, and of course, that's being compromised wholly by financial motivated attackers. Followed by credentials, which is a mix of both financial and espionage. And then, of course, our espionage people are looking for internal information, secrets, and system data. Attack targeting. This is what I mentioned at the very beginning. One of the interesting facts that I thought was that the attack targeting is really mostly, 3/4 of it happens to be opportunistic. So most of the time, a site isn't really, or a company is not being targeted. They just happen to be within the scope of someone scanning and finding a vulnerability, and now that company is being targeted. So opportunistic, meaning that a company has something vulnerable. That vulnerability is something that is being checked just kind of randomly or scanned randomly by a company. So they're not targeting this company. This company just is being targeted because they have some particular vulnerability. So I thought that was interesting. Most attacks are opportunistic, not particularly targeted, and that also backs up my whole little spiel that the financial guys, really what they're doing is they're looking at all different types of financial companies. There's a lot of them out there, and once they find one that they are able to breach based upon whatever particular vulnerability they're looking for, they go after it. Espionage, it's all targeted. They are looking for a particular company. When you consider the methods used by attackers to gain a foothold in organizations, brute force, stolen credentials, phishing, tampering, it's really not all that surprising that none receive the highly difficult rating. What would you fire a guided missile in an unlocked screen door? No. So this is, I thought, very funny. Yes, you wouldn't fire a missile in an unlocked screen door. That's just in reference to that we're really not, the companies that are getting attacked primarily because of opportunistic, they are not handling their security very well. And yes, they're being attacked by very simple, not very sophisticated methods, specifically brute force, stolen credentials, phishing, and tampering. These are not highly skilled attackers, but they're very successful because companies still aren't taking security seriously enough. All right, so here's a graph of that. So the difficulty level of the actual compromise. So Verizon went through and went, okay, so how are these attacks carried out? And then they rate the difficulty level of the attack. And you can see primarily most of the attacks involve very low difficulty levels, 68%. If you add that to very low, you've got 78%, more than 3/4 of the attacks are either very low or low difficulty levels. That is very sad. It's not that we have dumb hackers, it's that we have people that have very low security and are people who are doing the attacking, therefore don't have to use sophisticated methods. So let's fix that. That would be a big thing to fix. Some interpret attack difficulty as synonymous with the skill of the attacker. And while there's some truth to that, it almost certainly reveals much more about the skill and readiness of the defender. How true, just kind of what I just said. So difficulty of subsequent actions. Okay, so this is once someone has been attacked and there is a foothold. After there is a foothold, how difficult are the subsequent actions? Still pretty darn low. So it was easy to get in, and now once they're in, it's still easy to perform their attack, what they're actually trying to accomplish. So still low difficulty to do their subsequent actions once they're into the system they're trying to attack or get data from. And you can see financial still. Are people financially motivated? They're still using low measures. And espionage, so our state-sponsored China, they are using more highly sophisticated actions to perform their subsequent attacks. While it might be difficult to detect, positively identify, and respond to an intrusion within seconds or minutes, our ability to do so should ostensibly increase the longer they poke around our internal networks. But unfortunately, we're not really seeing that improvement. That is very sad. Yes, we have people that are actually taking months to discover an intrusion. Months. Look at that. 62% of a discovered intrusion is taking months. So that means that the attacker has compromised the system in hours. So 60% of the compromise happens within hours. If you look even more, let's see, we've got 11% is seconds, 13% is minutes. So when we add that up, we've got over 80% of attacks are being, or systems are being compromised within an hour, within hours. Once the compromise has taken place and the attacker has a foothold into the system, the next part is getting the data out. So getting the data out takes a little bit longer. You can see here that it's pretty flat on the weeks to months, but you can see here it takes weeks or months to find all the data that the attacker is looking for. But again, Still 36% is within hours. So it's taking them a while to find the data they're looking for, but it's taking us, the security people, even longer to discover them. So 62% of our discoveries are in the month's time frame. Not very good. So people are poking around in our systems for a very, very, very long time before they're even discovered. From there, containment, yeah, okay, we've discovered them, now we can contain them. Containment also takes a long time. You'd think you'd, get them off the system in maybe minutes or hours. Nope. 41% days, 14% weeks, and 22% in months. So takes a long time to successfully, completely remove all of the access that our attackers gained into our system. But this is the main one here that really is disturbing. 62% is months to discover the attacker. And what's even more sad is this. If not the most, this must be one of the most important challenges to the security industry. Prevention is crucial, and we can't lose sight of that goal. But we must accept the fact that no barrier is impenetrable. Yes, we know we're going to be attacked and someone's going to get in. And detection response represents an extremely critical line of defense. So, okay, if we know we can't stop them, we should at least be able to know they're there. So, let's stop treating our response as a backup plan if things go wrong, and plan to start making it a core part of the plan. Very nice. Yes, we should not just make this plan our backup plan. Oh, we got breached. Now what do we do? Plan B. No, we need to have watching after getting breached and seeing if someone's in our system part of the overall plan. So, over time, how does this look? Percent of breaches that remain undiscovered for months or more. Well, it looks like we were going in the right direction here, and then it looks like we kind of spiked back up again. But I'm going to say that we're really here at 66%. We probably were at 66% here as well. However, we just have more data to look at now. So I think this is probably would be a much straighter curve we have, or more of a straighter line, meaning that 66% of our undiscovered breaches are probably months or more across the board for the last 9 years. Approximately 70% of breaches were discovered by external parties. No. So even though it took us months to discover, guess who discovered it? We didn't. We didn't even discover it. External parties discovered the breach. So external parties who then notified the victim. This is admittedly better than the 92% observed in our last report, but well within the range of prior years. In fact, the imaginary regression line in figure 43 looks pretty flat to our eyes. Okay, here's the important part. Again, 70% of breaches were discovered by external parties. Let's look at that. Here's the data to back that point up. Discovery method. Number 1, 34% of unrelated parties. But we also we need to add in customer, law enforcement, unknown, reported by a user, a financial audit. Only 24% discovered by a fraud detection. What else do we have for internal? HIDs, that would be internal. NIDS, that would also be internal, right? Network intrusion detection system and host intrusion detection system. Incident response, IT audit. But when we add up our external guys, we've got unrelated party, customer, law enforcement, the actor themselves, they told us. So these are all the parties that discovered the intrusion, and unfortunately, you can see these are all external and these are all internal. Mostly it was external people that noticed the intrusion. Very, very bad. Breach count by discovery method and time to discover. You can see that 85 breaches were discovered within months by an unrelated party. And then from there, we've only got a few internally reported ones in the single digits. And these are most of them were externally reported. Okay, so with all that data, what do we do? How do we fix this? Well, I would say number one is start watching for people that have already compromised our security and are now poking around. But from there, we actually have a nice list of different security controls that should be put in place. So this is a list that we should go through if we're in charge of security of a company, or at least should know about them. Control number one, inventory of authorized and unauthorized devices. So we should know what we have and where it's at. And if it's not authorized, we should know it's there and we need to get rid of it. Inventory of authorized and unauthorized software. So we should know all the software that's running on all of our computers, and if it's not allowed, we shouldn't allow it to be installed. And this is a really good case for application whitelisting, which we'll talk about more during this week. Number three, secure configurations for hardware and software of on mobile devices, laptops, workstations, servers. We should just make sure it's configured properly. And then we should do scanning. This is the vulnerability assessment and remediation. We can do scanning. Malware defenses, right? We can have some antivirus. This is also nice for application whitelisting. So we should go through this whole list as security professionals and just make sure that all of these proper security controls are in place, and that would help alleviate becoming one of the statistics in this report. One nice thing that the report did for us is it lined up all of those 20 things that we just saw on the last page, all the 20 different security controls, and lined them up, or did a little matrix here, of all of the associated threats. So tampering is a threat. If we implemented control 1, 3, 7, or 9, that would all prevent, or maybe not prevent, but maybe drastically reduce tampering. And then spyware, you can see all the different controls that would help us root out spyware and backdoor and export data. So all of these controls are mapped specifically to all these threat actions. And why do we do this? Well, because not all companies are exactly the same, right? So my conclusion would be there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Right? We looked at different industries. Different industries are being attacked by different actors, and those actors are accomplishing their particular breaches with different methods. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution. What you need to do is look at your profile and figure out who's going to attack you, why they're attacking you, and how they're going to attack you. So list of threats can differ dramatically from one organization to another, right? Just like what I said. So a couple interesting things to implement. One, we could implement something called the kill chain approach. What that is the adversary must progress successfully through each stage of the chain before it can achieve its desired objective. Just one mitigation disrupts the chain and the adversary. So remember, we saw a lot of combinations of first a phishing email is sent out, and then malware is installed, and then from there they're able to pivot to servers. So there's the chain. If we're able to disrupt any of those three things in the chain, then we're able to disrupt the whole attack. So we don't have to necessarily disrupt the very first thing, but we do need to disrupt one of those actions, and disrupting one of those actions will definitely help slow that intrusion down. Another thing that we could use, and we'll also look at this during the week, is something called Microsoft's EMET, Enhanced Mitigation Experience Toolkit. What that does for us is it functions by blocking entire classes of exploits instead of only the specific. So the specific meaning the fingerprint, which is what our antivirus does. Microsoft's EMET actually looks at an entire class of an exploit and then blocks it based upon that class. This is very similar. Actually, this is another thing that we'll look at this week. So we'll look at EMET, and we're also going to look at application whitelisting. And I think both of those will definitely help us reduce some of the problems that we see in this very long, detailed report. Okay, that's it. Good luck on the quiz.